John, welcome to London Real.
Well, thank you for being in London. I'm on the island of Mustique, and I just got out the swimming pool, so I better shut up. People get envious. I'm going to start doing chats with fans. If I do that, I can pay for the hotel rooms, and I have to be in hotel rooms because for tax reasons, I can't go back to Britain. Sometimes they just want to tell me how wonderful I am, and I don't object to that strongly. It can become repetitive, but the funniest one of all was a fella, and he showed me this black leather jacket of his when he came online, and I told him how nice it looked, and then after we chatted about that for a time, I said to him, "So, do you have any questions or anything you want to tell me?" And he said, "Not really." And I said, "Well, can I ask why are we having this conversation?" He said, "I wanted you to be the first person to see my black new jacket."
And you were going to make it happen. That was it. There was a will, there was a way.
Brian, that's a nice way of putting it, but actually we'd given up, and it was only because Eric Idle was a good friend of George Harrison, and he gave George the script, and George read it. He says he fell out of bed. I don't know, that's apocryphal. And he rang Eric up and said, "I'm putting the money up." And Eric said, "What are you talking about?" And George said, I'll put the money up for the film." Well, I love what he says about time. It's the most important quality, and yet it's the thing we give away most easily.
So true. So true.
For example, I spend a lot of my day when I could be reading philosophy doing interviews. When we finish, shall we finish?
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is John Cleese, the British comedian, actor, screenwriter, author, and founding member of Monty Python. In a career spanning 6 decades, you created some of the most iconic shows in film and TV history, from Fawlty Towers, for which you won a BAFTA, to The Life of Brian, to A Fish Called Wanda. You also appeared in multiple James Bond and Harry Potter movie franchises. In more recent years, you've spoken out about your disappointment in how Britain has changed, the poor leadership in this country, and in particular, your distaste for the UK's written press. Last year, you permanently left the country and relocated to the Caribbean. Your new book, Creativity, A Short and Cheerful Guide, explores how the mind works as you search for inspiration and how everyone can develop their creative unconscious. John, welcome to London Real.
Well, thank you for being in London. I'm on the island of Mustique, and I just got out the swimming pool, so I better shut up. People get envious.
And I see birds behind you, and it sounds like a completely different feel than what's going on here. John, so excited to have you here. And I wanted to start off and talk a little bit about censorship, because it's something you've talked about for a long time, but I didn't really feel it until April of this year when we started having conversations with people. And we had a narrative that was different than the mainstream media, different than the government. And we were censored on the technology platforms. Ofcom wouldn't allow our programs to be put on television. We were attacked by the BBC and a lot of publications. And it was a really bumpy ride, John. And before I
understand a lot of this, let me ask you a couple of questions. You've been doing this for 9 years.
Yeah, 9 years, didn't have a single...
9 years without any problems. And then in April, you did something that was not on the beaten track. And you got which, can I ask, what did people complain about?
Well, what happened is we started the lockdown here, and, you know, the government was kind of saying, this is what's happening. And we started asking questions about, are we sure of the details? And let's talk about the science. And we started having different conversations than the government and the mainstream media was having. And as opposed to just have those ideas out there, free speech, to let people decide for themselves, we got shut down. It was almost like they were treating our viewers not like adults, but almost as children that had to be protected.
But I ask you, were they criticizing you, or were they actually shutting you down so that you couldn't broadcast?
Well, great question. So YouTube, which is, the biggest really video streaming platform in the world, on April 6th, John, we did the second largest YouTube live stream in the world. So it was massive. 65,000 people were watching concurrently.
Why was it so big?
Because we were talking about ideas that were different than the government. We were asking the government, okay, tell us more about this. Why do we have to lock down? Is it really what the right thing to do? And what happened is 30 minutes later, the episode was deleted, and then we were banned from continuing to stream on YouTube. So it was really interesting to see the Facebooks and the Instagrams and the YouTubes really shut us down. And it was my first introduction, John, to this world of censorship and mainstream media attacks. So it was a real introduction for me to this whole new world that I think you've been talking about for a long time.
Yes, but you see, because I'm a comedian and therefore what I do isn't serious, I don't think anybody's ever got to the point of closing me down. I mean, sometimes they get upset because somebody said a word, like a recent thing with the Major on 40 Towers, but nobody's ever closed me down. It seems to me at first sight to be an absolute disgrace. I mean, the whole point of a democracy, of a society where people feel free to live their own lives and to express their own thoughts, so not being allowed to challenge the government, is an absolute disgrace. And there seems to be at the moment a wave of authoritarianism all over the world, whether you look at Russia or China or India or Israel, but now even here. I mean, we knew it was always the case in America. I couldn't believe under George W. Bush, the people who said we shouldn't be invading Iraq, they got a whacking. An absolute verbal whacking. Nobody was interested in anything they had to say or whether it might throw light. And now everybody knows the government was wrong and lying anyway. So it's terribly important that we get to speak. But I think that's disgraceful. Of course, we should be discussing the various ways, but we should be discussing them with an open mind and basically asking questions of the other side rather than just attacking the other side.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, free speech is something I kind of grew up with, at least the concept of that in America, and same in Britain. And so when we started having these ideas, it was strange that someone would want to shut an idea down as opposed to let it stand on its own merit.
I think it's because England's changed, or maybe I should say the UK, but I'm quite old, as you know. I'm 81 in a couple of weeks. In 1956, the British concocted a most ridiculous plan with the French and the Israelis to attack the Suez Canal, which Nasser had just nationalized. And the BBC took a very critical attitude to this. And there was a lot of argument, but it was pretty civilized because the debating in those days was quite intelligent. And it was until relatively recently. I have a very good friend. He edits my books, and he's one of the brightest people I know. And a few weeks ago, he said he'd been watching TV interviews from the 70s, and he instanced one where Roy Jenkins was arguing with Wedgwood Men. And he said they obviously didn't like each other, but it was civilized. They were answering each other's arguments with other arguments and facts. And the whole thing was intelligent and civilized. Well, you don't see that on television now. We have become a tabloid culture. Ever since basically Murdoch took over, because the reason Murdoch was at the beginning of the tabloid culture is he was the first the first editor, or rather a newspaper owner, the first newspaper owner who didn't want to become a lord. Up to that time, they'd always kept their noses clean because they, more than anything in the world, they wanted a peerage. Murdoch didn't give a damn. So he just went down market and took everyone else down market too. And since then, the culture has been deteriorating, becoming less intelligent, less civil, less well-informed, and more sort of based on emotion. I mean, now, as far as I could make out, there's a lot of people who get involved in the arguments about transgender who have interesting things to say, but who think that anyone who disagrees with them must hate them. Now, that's insanity.
And you started speaking about this a few years ago and calling out the UK press here, but the reaction, it wasn't a great reaction from the media. They didn't necessarily agree with you, that you made them feel very uncomfortable when you did that.
Well, I don't know what they do if you criticize them, is they try to starve you of oxygen. Do you see what I mean? They won't actually take place in a debate. I mean, the first time I ever noticed this, I saw the way the press was going, and I can't remember what year it was, but it was probably early 80s. And I remember I was doing a Michael Aspel show with a very strange combination, Norman Tebbit and Julio Iglesias. And at some point, I spoke out against the press, and I said I thought they were nasty and that they were not running proper stories anymore and that they weren't really working hard and checking their facts. And it was the first time I'd ever said anything like that. And I got a big round of applause from the audience, and it quite surprised me. So I watched the show a couple of days later when it was actually transmitted, and we got to that bit, and they cut it out. The television company didn't want to annoy the newspapers. And you begin to realize they're very powerful. They can hurt people's incomes. You see, one of the reasons I speak out about them, of course, is I earn most of my money abroad. But they'll do absolutely everything in their power to cut you off financially. First of all, they starve you of oxygen. And then if you, for example, compare the reviews of my book from around the world, Canada, America, Australia, Northern Europe, all these places, and compare them with the reviews in the Mail, the Telegraph, and the Spectator, you'd think they were talking about different books.
Wow.
I mean, the Telegraph critic, who was the #2 music critic, says there's not a chuckle in it. And several papers say, just hilarious, fall about funny. Now, why? And the answer is the word has been passed down, give a bad review to this person because he criticizes the press. And so I hardly trust them at all. I trust the BBC. If I'm doing Radio 4 or something like that, that's fine. But I wouldn't give interviews to the press. I would write a piece for them, but I wouldn't allow them to edit it because they have no scruples. They're completely unfair in their editing, and they'll take anything out. For example, I went on television once with Emily Maitlis to talk about the fact that the European Broadcasting Union had a poll of every European country. They'd asked 1,000 people in each country about the printed press and said, do you trust it? And we came last. We came last in Europe. And we have come last in 9 of the last 10 years, Brian. Did you ever read about that?
I heard you talk about that, and I was shocked. I didn't think confidence was that low in this country with the press.
Most of my friends now say that they don't read any newspaper at all.
Right.
They don't trust anyone.
Because it's someone else's narrative, someone else's agenda, and it's not real.
Yes, I mean, I just noticed in the last few days in some of the right-wing papers, there have been more interviews, or rather pieces, more supportive of Trump, at this point. And where's that coming from? Well, certainly in the Sunday Times, it's coming from Murdoch. Murdoch's making a fortune, an absolute fortune, out of providing television for people who are not really educated and who have very few information. There was a poll, admittedly it was some years ago, that showed that people who watch Fox television were less well informed than people who didn't watch television at all, which is kind of funny. But I don't trust any of them. They're in it for the money and they're in it for the power. And if I criticize them, then they ought still, if they put their readership first, to let their readers know now and again what's being said. But they'd rather be powerful than serve their readers. So they would just starve me of oxygen. That's why there's hardly been a review of the creativity book so far. And it has been very warmly spoken of in a lot of places.
Interesting.
I want to ask you about it because you're an engineer.
Yeah.
You're an engineer, right?
Yes, I am. And the book really spoke to me. I want to jump into the book for sure. Just want to finish with the media, also, we've also seen recently this kind of real change with this movement of kind of the wokeness of the world, and also going back and revising old content and taking it down. And I know temporarily one of your old episodes of Faulty Towers was taken down, and I know you called out against that. Also, because you're a comedian, and a comedian, you walk a fine line between, cultural commentary and entertainment. And sometimes what you say is...
In this particular case, Brian, I was appalled that the people in charge of the BBC, who are supposed to know something about entertainment, and some of them are supposed to know something about comedy, they don't seem to realize you can attack something in two ways. One is a frontal assault, and the other is like Alf Garnett in Or Till Death Do Us Part, or what was it, Archie Bunker, in the American version of it.
Yes.
You put these ridiculous views into the mouth of someone who's clearly ridiculous, and that's how you ridicule the views. But there are always going to be some completely dumb people who are literal-minded and lack any sense of irony, who are going to say, at last, these things are being said on television, when they're being said in order to make fun of them. So you can't foolproof comedy. People have to have a certain level of intelligence before they get intelligent comedy.
Do you think we should not remove old programming regardless? Or do you think there's always some historical record that's important there? Or do you think there is a time where you need to take down programming?
Well, I'm very dubious about it. I think it's everyone's on about British imperialism at the moment. And I'm reading a couple of books by Harari, by Noah Harari, I always forget his first name. And he's pointing out that basically empires have been the way of organizing the world for something like 4,500 years. So if you're suddenly going to say this is very wicked, you have to say, well, everything in the last 4,500 years was a bit wicked. The fact is that the history of the world is basically a history of crime. And it's a question of any strong nation was always bullying the weak ones around it. That's not the nasty side of human nature. To try and pretend that the nastiness is all concentrated in the British Empire, which was actually a lot better run than a lot of the other empires. Compare it with Belgium, for example. People who are trying to pretend that all the wickedness are in it. No, as Noah Harari says, many good things came out of the empire. What I'm completely against is any kind of thinking that this is all good or this is all bad. That is paranoia. That's the definition of paranoia. And what we need to see is everything spread over a spectrum. Yes, there were all empires everywhere, because that was the way the world was. But some were a bit better than others, and some were worse than others. And on that spectrum, it's interesting to talk. But the whole idea, we got to wrap up 4,500 years of human history, because a few young people in the last 10 years have decided it should be God. It's patently absurd.
What do you think? What do you think when you see statues being pulled down? What do you think?
I guess there are some statues one would want to pull down, but the whole point is a lot of the people whose statues are being pulled down were also philanthropists. And if you say, yes, but they were connected, for example, with the slave trade, well, yeah, well, so were Plato and Socrates. Right, and Aristotle. They believed that culture was only possible with a slave class. Now, what do we do? Not read Plato anymore? Then you've got Isaac Newton. Well, he had shares in the East India Company. So does that mean, and they had slavery. I think it was only 7% of their business, but that means we were going to go back and redo optics again. It's a question of being much more interested and much more balanced about it and looking what's good and what's bad. And if there's someone who's really concerned with slavery, then that I think there's an argument. I don't mind seeing this going over, the Colston guy in Bristol. But of course, he did an enormous number of good works. And I have a lot of friends in Bristol, West Countrymen like myself, who actually always thought of him as a philanthropist. So it's not black and white. And the only people who wanted to be black and white are people with very paranoid minds. And what worries me about the woke people is they're trying so hard to be pure that they see hatred in everyone else.
Yeah, we see a lot of that, and we see a lot of division. We see, a lot of people saying, are you on our side or their side? I mean, we saw J.K. Rowling kind of canceled because she made some comments that obviously she believed in and she thought about, but immediately kind of that left side says, well, you're either all in or all out, it seems. And now they want to not by her.
That's insanity. I mean, that is a form of insanity, and it's called paranoia. And I know a bit about this because I helped Robin Skinner write a couple of books, and it was a subject we talked about a lot. So even though I'm not in any way a qualified psychologist, I've had seminars for 4 years with one of the top psychiatrists in England. That enables me to have a reasonably well-informed opinion about things like this. And what I'm trying to get people to see, it's all on a spectrum. As my mother said, there's good and bad in all people. Yes, there's good and bad in all people. Mother Teresa said that she began her work because she realized that there was a Hitler lurking in her. Now, those people I love because they're trying to see the whole picture. But the little self-righteous ones who sit around waiting to be offended so that they can experience this warm glow of moral superiority, I think they're clowns.
So what do we do about the political correctness? And it feels like
we just keep talking. We just keep talking, and we try and get a few. We publicizing the book. I was talking to a lovely lady, Martha Carney on Radio 4, and I talked to her about this, and I said I would love to have a debate, a perfectly friendly one with a woke person. I never heard another word. Now, you would have thought if the woke people were up for it, that they would have said, yes, let's have a debate. Let's hear what you have to say. You hear what we have to say. Nobody suggested it. You see what I mean? They'd rather go on being righteous and sticking exactly in their present position than they would to try and find out. Whereas I'm always trying to find out stuff, and people send me stuff. I'm worried about this New Zealand weightlifter. I think her, Laurel Hubbard, who wasn't a particularly good weightlifter when she was a man, but she then said she was a woman and is now winning all the competitions. Now, if you start life with a man's body and then later on you become a woman, you are at a huge disadvantage against women who've always been women, because they didn't start life with a man's body. And men's bodies are, on the whole, this is a generalization, are bigger and stronger. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to say, I don't think this is fair to women who've always been women. And then you could say, well, then you're into hatred. And the answer is no, you're batty.
And you just got canceled by saying that, probably, John.
Probably. My daughter is always trying to restrain me. She's a darling, darling girl. And she once warmed my heart by saying that I was one of the least prejudiced people she'd ever met. And I love her very much. She's always saying, be careful, be careful. And the nice thing is I'm going to be dead soon, so I can actually, I don't have a terminal disease yet. But I'd rather speak out, and I don't mind idiots insulting me. But Winston Churchill once said the most exhilarating thing in life is being shot at, provided people miss. Well, I love being insulted by very stupid people. It braces me in the morning and makes my breakfast better.
But like you said, these people, they don't want to debate. They want to cancel you, or they kind of want to destroy something. It feels like they don't want to compromise or learn. It's kind of their way or the highway.
That's right. And the standard of journalism and of politics in this country used to be much higher. And I think that what I really noticed, it started to go downhill, and I would pin it on Thatcher, because Thatcher believed in argument by assertion. There is no alternative. She would assert something, and 10 years ago, people would have backed that assertion up with evidence and argument, and she didn't bother. She just said, this is the way it is. And once that happens, then the other side starts behaving the same way too. The effect of anybody getting paranoid is to make the other side paranoid, more paranoid, because it's very nasty when people try lump all the bad things in you, then you tend to react by trying to lump all the bad things in them, and then you can't have any kind of conversation. That's what paranoia is.
Yeah. And John, what does that do to comedy? Because as a comedian, almost by definition, you have to take risks. You have to potentially offend people to do your job. So does that change comedy today? Is comedy too safe because of all this?
I think it's always been a little bit like that. I've always noticed that there are some comedians going back 40 years who would very carefully stay out of any kind of political argument because they knew that whatever they said, it would offend some people. You see what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about
go on.
No, if you think about some of your creations from, the Monty Pythons to the Fish Called Wanda, I mean, would that even be allowed to be produced today, or would it offend so many people that the producers would can it?
I don't know. And the answer is I don't know, because I discovered some years ago when I had to go on working rather hard as a result of that divorce, that the easiest and cleanest way of making money was to do stage shows. And if I do stage shows, and I've done an awful lot now, I've done several hundred, I go out in front of 1,500 people and I make them laugh. And I always get a standing ovation. One or two people walk out. I'm proud to say Trump supporters tend to walk out in America. But otherwise, I get a very nice reaction. But the whole point is they're a selected audience. They've come to see John Cleese because they like his comedy. If they hate me and can't stand my comedy, they don't buy tickets. So I have an audience pre-selected to like what I do. And when I go out, I do my kind of humor, and there's a lot of laughter. They don't complain about my jokes because they think that's nonsense. They think BPC stuff is nonsense like I do. The big problem would be if I started to do a television program now that it goes out to lots and lots of people, and then I'm absolutely sure that I would immediately cause offense. But I've always known that. I mean, one of the funniest episodes in 40 Towers is the dead body. Well, when Connie and I were writing that, we thought, anybody who's just lost a relative who is going to watch this show is going to be a bit upset. We thought, well, they can turn off. And that means that 95% of the population who don't find it shocking can enjoy a terribly funny program. But are we going to say, no, all you people out there, you can't enjoy this because it might offend a very small number of people? And it seems to me the woke people are amongst the most easily upset, the most oversensitive, whereas for an older generation, I think, was a little more stoical about it. If somebody attacked them, they just shrugged their shoulders.
John, when you create something that's actually that funny as that episode, by definition, will you always have to offend a certain number of people? Does it have to be pushing it that far to make people think it's so funny enough to make their day? Are you by definition going to offend other people?
Yes, yeah. Always.
That's what I thought.
I learned that early on. I learned if you try to please everyone, you finish up with pabulum, as they used to say. In other words, you finish up with dross, with no character that isn't very funny. I always thought, what would a woke situation comedy be? It'd be a comedy about a functional family. And it would be very, very heartwarming, and there wouldn't be a laugh in it. You see, because comedy or humor, except for puns, humor is all about criticism of the weaknesses of human beings. If you tried to write a funny show about someone who was wise and generous and kind and thoughtful and well-informed, it would be a disaster. American agent once said to me, show me a comedy about Francis of Assisi and I'll show you a bummer. It's about the failures. Basil is funny. He's such a failure. He has so many faults. If he was a nicer person, he wouldn't be so funny.
And how important is comedy in the fabric of society? I mean, the people almost need that relief, and comedy can say things that other people can't say. They can cut in and criticize in a way it's packaged in through humor, and it can actually change a society. But if you're not allowed to do real comedy, then are we all going to pay for that?
Yes, we will. Yes, absolutely, we will. I mean, there's so many things in what you said. I mean, the great value of the court jester about in medieval times was that he could say things that were a little bit cheeky about the king, but everybody laughed, and the king couldn't really get cross because everyone else laughed. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So that the court jester was allowed to say things. And I know sometimes that I have that license as a sort of court jester. But there were so many things raised by that question. Ask it again, because there's at least two other things.
Yeah, no, there is, because, well, first of all, comedy, when done really well and intelligently, can change the narrative and the course of a civilization by pointing things out that a frontal assault wouldn't. For example, if you told the king that he was being lazy, you get your head cut off. But if a court jester does it, the king might get the idea and change his habits.
Exactly. That's why he was so important in a medieval court. But there were other things that you were saying. I can't remember but there were so many things packaged in what you said.
The other thing was that if we don't have that biting, real satirical comedy that's going to upset the woke people, which you're not allowed to do anymore because you'll get canceled and the publishers will get canceled. If we don't have that, how is that going to hurt our society 10 years, 20 years on, when we can't have that release, we can't have those ideas even entertained in our brains? I just wonder, what does that do to us?
Well, it means that there has to be a way of thinking, and you're in trouble if you don't think that way, which is, of course, the complete opposite of a democracy. It's good that people in a democracy argue, but they should argue and try and listen to each other. As I say, I've been following some of the trans stuff, but I've been getting quite a lot of stuff to read, and I want to understand why, if you disagree with the general trans attitude, that makes you a hater of transgender people. I don't get that yet. And I don't think I'll ever can get it, but I'm open to an argument that that's a form of hatred. Not that I can see. So if we are listening to each other, we learn. I mean, if you have somebody, let's say a Russian government, that suddenly decides that there are no innate abilities, as they did earlier on, then that meant that scientists had to come up with all sorts of science to do with the fact that everything is a blank slate and is formed by environment instead of from heredity. So you just get nonsense spoken. And at the moment, the biggest single nonsense is the refusal of science to accept some of the anomalies that are being pointed out by people who study psi phenomena. And as someone who's read a lot of the literature, all of it by scientists, there is overwhelming evidence that some of the psi phenomena exist. The science, standard science, can't face it.
You know, I've had a guest here that
they feel they can't explain it. And so they say that's not possible, instead of saying, we don't have a theory that could explain that, which would be a more open-minded way of approaching the problem.
And these are like concepts about the universe and scientific ideas and big ideas.
So something like remote viewing, which is, there's a very interesting woman. She was the top woman in the American Statistical Association. She made a speech a few years ago in which she said most of the existence of these psi phenomena like remote viewing and precognition and telepathy have been proved. She said the only reason they haven't been proved is it's such a hot subject that the scientists won't accept it. But this is a very good example of how a sort of groupthink among a certain group of people just says you can't think or say that. I mean, if you are interested in psi phenomena, you can't study it at university. You can talk about it if you're a professor. One professor told me this, but you can't talk about it. And you can be interested as a student, but you'll never get a PhD thesis on it, despite the fact there are experiments out there which are absolutely inexplicable at the results in terms of ordinary materialist reductionist science.
Yeah, as humans, we think that we see everything, but if you actually look at the bandwidth of light and sound, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of all the information in the universe. And yet we assume, as the higher primates, that we've got it all figured out. and there's no other possible explanations, and it's one of our flaws.
That's exactly right. I mean, one of the greatest scientists of all was Richard Feynman.
Yes.
And Richard, who was lovely, and when he had a bit of time off, he'd go and play the drums. You know,
he loved the drums, right?
A mensch. And Richard Feynman simply said once that he would rather be open to all possibilities than to be attached to a particular mindset, which he knew probably wasn't right.
And that's one of the top physicists probably of all time, who was all about theory and numbers, and he was willing to also say that there could be things out there I can't explain.
Yes, but the resistance of scientists to change is quite extraordinary, and people don't realize it. One of the earliest breakthrough scientists who laid the basis for quantum physics was Max Planck. And Max Planck said on one occasion, science progresses one funeral at a time. Now, if Max Planck says that, we need to think about it. He said it's people dying off that allows us to change theories.
That's powerful. My dad actually learned from Richard Feynman when he was at Caltech in 1961 or 62, and told me great stories about him. And yeah, he knew him for many years, and he's a fascinating guy for sure.
Oh, do you have any stories about it?
You know, so
my heroes.
So Richard Feynman, I think he was teaching at MIT where I studied engineering, but he did a couple of years at Caltech in Los Angeles where my dad was studying electrical engineering, and he taught the basic freshman class, I think, in physics, and it's still recorded to this day. And it was like the biggest celebrity ever coming in and teaching you basic stuff. But so they recorded it, and it was a big deal for the freshmen to learn from this guy. And my dad said he used to come and hang out with him in the dorms. And in their 20-year reunion, he came back before he got his cancer. And he just said he was just this incredible guy to hang out with. I mean, he was a rock star because he had, been at Los Alamos working on the Manhattan Project in his 20s.
That's right.
So, and he's written incredible books. So how did you know him?
Well, I came across him years ago, and everything I ever read about him, it just struck me what a marvelous man he was, because he was so alive and so unrigid and so open to everything, and yet he was absolutely brilliant. And this is true of a lot of scientists, who are really, really good, but you don't get to hear about them. I mean, I was talking to my cardiologist a couple of years ago, and because I pop in every year, I reckon it's a good idea to get things checked. And he's lovely. He's an Aussie. He trained in Melbourne. And I said to him, well, what is this about fats? And he said, well, we got it wrong. I said, well, go on. He said, well, we know now it's really sugar. It's not fats. And I said, but it's been fats for, he said, 60 years. I said, well, how can the medical profession have been saying it was fats for 60 years? Isn't that, what about the science? And he said, well, you can't get funding for research that challenges the current paradigm. So you can't get money to do experiments that show that the paradigm is wrong, because the people in charge don't give money to people who are challenging the current paradigm. Now, when you think about that, this is bordering on insanity. And this is why, the whole idea of creativity is so important, because the creatives are always bumping up against the people who want to know what they're getting for their money. You say to a writer of a screenplay or something like that, you say, here's your money, we want to see an outline in 3 weeks, which immediately puts him under the time pressure that will make sure that he does something that's more stereotypical and derivative, because that's the way you can get it done in 3 weeks. So and the people in charge want to know what they're getting, although they haven't the slightest bloody idea about whether it's any good or not. They just agree with each other. You see what I mean? So there's built-in tension always between the creative people and the people who finance things, which means the people who make things happen. And my experience, my professional experience over the years, and I was lucky to be at the BBC with Billy Cotton and John Howard Davies and Michael Mills and people like that, major figures who operated out of confidence and trusted their gut. And now you just have a little scurrying group of marketing people and executives who've never written, performed, or directed comedy, who do sometimes think that because somebody's given them a big desk that they suddenly understand comedy. Most of the executives I've worked with have been no good at all, but the trouble is they have no idea that they're no good.
I mean, on that note, how did you get the funding for the movies you did with Monty Python, The Holy Grail, Life of Brian, and even something like A Fish Called Wanda? Because it seems like those guys behind the desk would have never given you the millions and millions you needed for the high production value on those movies.
I have to tease you about this, Brian, because the millions of millions. I mean, the first film we ever made cost £240,000.
Okay, which movie was that?
That was Holy Grail. Oh, there was one before that that cost £100,000. So my Holy Grail cost £140,000, I think it was. And then Life of Brian cost £2 million, Brian. Can you believe that?
Wow.
And not a single English or Hollywood studio would back it. Life of Brian recently voted best British comedy of all time. I don't take those things very seriously, but it does mean it's up there with the best. And we couldn't get £2 million from anyone in England or $3 million from anyone in the United States. So we made it eventually because that marvelous man, George Harrison, put the money up for it because he was a creative and he could see what it was about. But once you had experiences like that, you just realize the people in charge, they haven't a fucking clue.
So you had to find some independent financing and you were going to make it happen. That was it. There was a will, there was a way. You were all highly motivated.
Brian, that's a nice way of putting it, but actually we'd given up, and it was only because Eric Idle was a good friend of George Harrison, and he gave George the script, and George read it. He says he fell out of bed. I don't know, that's apocryphal. And he rang Eric up and said, I'm putting the money up. And Eric said, what are you talking about? And George said, I'll put the money up for the film. Why? He said, I want to see it. Isn't that the most wonderful story? He could see the possibilities in it, you see. I mean, when we went in to the BBC to sell Monty Python, it's an extraordinary story. But they heard we wanted to do a series together. We'd never worked together before, though we'd all been on the writer's table for David Frost. We knew each other. And when we went in, he said, well, what are you guys proposing to do if I give you a comedy series? And we couldn't answer because we hadn't discussed it. Can you believe that? A pitch meeting in which the writers have just discussed what they're going to do. And he asked us questions like guest star and whether there be music. And in the end, he just looked at us and shrugged and said, go away and make 13 programs. And I believe that it was because we didn't have a concept that we were able to go out there and explore with no limitations at all, without any parameters on it about what we were going to do. And that's why it was, I believe, a very original series. Wow. But again, 99% of the time would not get picked up. And particularly, last about 4 years ago, the guy in charge of BBC Comedy said he wouldn't have commissioned it because they were 4 white guys.
Right. Where did that confidence come from, you, John, and the rest of the group and the troupe, to be able to really believe you could pull it off, to pitch that? I mean, that's a lot of confidence.
You just get a feeling. Yeah, you just get a feeling. You think the other guys are pretty good, and you think, I think we could do something interesting, and then you get a little bit excited about it. It's really it's as simple as that.
Okay.
You just get excited, and you see, in those days, the BBC was acting out of confidence. And if you're dealing with an organization that acts out of confidence, then you can find out what the decision-making process is, and you can get a decision. If the organization is running out of fear, you can't really find out who's taking the decision. And you find it's all about committees who get together and make sure that nobody's out of step, because if you're out of step, you could be proved wrong. Whereas if everyone in the committee agrees with you, you're kind of safe because you all made the mistake together. So you get groupthink. You just get a group of people who think they know what they're talking about when they have honestly no idea at all. And they seem to think, I often get on commercials. It's happened on the Specsavers commercial I did.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.